Good evening. I'd like to begin with a simple truth. Horse racing is ugly and mean and cruel. And this too. Horse racing kills horses as a matter of course. This is not hyperbole, no mere conjecture, it's a fact. But before I get into the specifics and the wrongs that define this vile industry, I'd like to share with you how horse racing wrongs came to be. A few years back, while writing the animal rights blog for the Times Union, I was doing some research for a prospective post on horse racing. At the time, I was aware of the slaughter issue, as some prominent outlets, including HBO's Real Sports, had covered it. But I soon learned that no one, no individual, no organization, not PETA, not the HSUS, was taking on this industry full bore, documenting the everyday cruelty and killing. So I decided to step into that void. I did not because I have any racing background, I don't, nor because I have a special affinity for equines. I care for all animals equally. Rather, I saw a desperate need, exploited animals who were being sorely underrepresented, and set out to try to help. When I launched the website in 2013, I envisioned a clearinghouse of sorts for all things negative I could find on the industry. The drugging, doping, the whipping, slaughter, of course. But a few months in, I began reviewing the official race charts each morning. These charts, covering every thoroughbred and quarter horse race run in America, are basic recountings of how the races unfolded, box scores, if you will, for the bettors. But amid the handicapping data, conditions, odds, payouts, and performance numbers, places, lengths back, and times, are notes for each of the horses. And within these notes, couched in racing's own unique vernacular, can be found some of the bad. I quickly learned what went wrong, took a bad step, fell, did not finish, came back lame, returned bleeding from the nostrils, pulled up in distress, and Van Doff meant. And it wasn't long at all before I understood broke down as the industry's euphemism of choice for dead. So from these charts, I began compiling and publishing weekly lists. Still, I wanted more information, more data, more facts to fight this multi-billion-dollar industry. And after talking to the Grade 2K people, an organization committed to and on the precipice of achieving the end of greyhound racing in America, I began filing Freedom of Information Act requests with each racing state. The result was a first of its kind killed in action list, confirmed deaths on American tracks, names, dates, locations. That initial list in 2014 was roughly 1,000 strong, a number that has remained remarkably consistent in each year since. But after factoring in what I don't or can't have, states that deny my request outright on the dubious basis of confidentiality, other states that withhold training deaths, the so-called catastrophically injured who are euthanized back at the owner's or trainer's farm, horses who perish at private training facilities, and simply apathetic and or slipshod reporting to and from racing commissions, I can state with full confidence that well over 2,000 horses are killed racing or training on U.S. tracks every year. Over 2,000. Imagine that. How, you may ask, do they die? Well, death, as it turns out, comes in various forms. Imploded hearts, sudden cardiac events they call them, this, mind you, to animals who are mostly still in puberty. Pulmonary hemorrhage, or bleeding to death. Broken necks, crushed spines, ruptured ligaments, and of course, shattered legs, occasionally shattered so severely that the limb remains attached to the rest of the body by skin or tendons only. Often, transport is impossible, so the horse must wait in pain and terror for the vet to arrive with a pink solution that will end his life. Other times, the mortally injured animal is vanned back to the barn where he can be, in the obscene industry parlance, humanely destroyed, far from the public eye, obviously exactly the way the industry prefers. To more personalize this killing, I'd like to share with you some of the information I received from state racing commissions. While listening, please bear in mind that these 40 or so horses represent but a tiny fraction of the over 5,000 I I have documented on the website. The descriptions and circumstances of these deaths come directly from the FOIA documents. Horses killed on American tracks. ZZ Rider. The horse took a bad step and continued on. The horse put its head down and somersaulted on track. Exam showed an open, disarticulated fetlock joint with the MC3 bone sticking out. All collateral ligaments ruptured. He's a fast wagon. Right front ankle was disarticulated from the parent bone and hanging by a shred of skin. Tempting eyes, horse caught reins and rail and snapped neck. Lady Angel collapsed while training with copious amount of blood coming out of both nostrils. Wind Warrior, horse broke down near the 3/8 pole but continued on to the finish line. Exam showed bilateral sesamoid fractures, rupture of the distal ligaments and collateral ligament, disarticulation of the fetlock joint, the bone was exposed. Coolit, euthanasia due to shock from large laceration with arterial bleeding. Johanna Joe broke down around half-mile pole, then continued to run half-mile. Repeated trauma caused ankle to become dislocated and destroyed soft tissues. Ran to finish line where she was put down on track. Baytown Princess, compound, open, complete transverse fracture of both front cannon bones just below the knees. Tyist, fractured skull, hemorrhaging from both nostrils and ears. Quiet Title, sudden cardiac arrest, horse fell and broke neck, someone saw blood from the ears. Must See, tore whole chest out upon hitting the rail. Corona Favorita, fractured left femur, bled out, died. Apostles' Creed, started race, broke stride, pulled up, laid down, and died. Ruth's Lotus, horse fractured both knees at 3/8 pole. El Bandito, while racing, the horse had open, comminuted fractures. The horse flipped in the ambulance, went over the partition, and had to be euthanized inside the ambulance. Name withheld by Kentucky Racing Commission. Horse collapsed, severe pulmonary hemorrhage, large amount of bloody froth in the trachea, nasal cavity, and within the nares. Marked pulmonary hemorrhage, large amount of blood exudes from the lungs upon sectioning. Name withheld, again by the Kentucky Racing Commission. Carcass is swollen and unstable, with a joint containing abundant bloody fluid with bony particles admixed. Comminuted slab fractures of the radial, intermediate, ulnar, third, and fourth carpal bones, with the slab fractures being entirely separated from the underlying bone. Severe ligamentous damage with the rupture of a number of intercarpal ligaments and the collateral ligaments. Name withheld, again by the Kentucky Racing Commission. Multiple fractures to multiple bones. The lungs are mildly congested, suggesting increased respiratory effort as the result of pain. Smoke It Is a Shame, fractured hock, complete, separated. He Can Run, pelvic fracture that lacerated an artery and precipitated hypovolemic shock followed by death. SC Dusty Champion, fractured ankle, went airborne and landed on the entire left side, including head. Tracy Zoe, spinal cord dislocation. Dominant diversion, died on track, hemorrhage via nostrils. Tara Inferno, horse flipped and hit head after race due to heat stroke. Gigaman, catastrophic collision, likely neck fracture. Yo Adrian, horse lethargic after training, fell and died. Dream Player, flipped over inside rail of training track, sustaining blunt trauma. Jesse's Story, horse fell, sustained severe skull fracture and died. Caxit Electronica and 6 drivers collided with each other. The former suffered a fractured skull and died, the latter a fractured neck and died. Some Special Hum, heat distress, picked up off racetrack and died at barn. Saints Be Praised, suffered fractures to both front legs. Grim, following the race while walking back to the barn, horse collapsed and after 3 agonal breaths died on track. Flying Palm, snapped leg. You Know Jano, profuse hemorrhage from both nostrils. Callie Sue Boo broke both knees. Retreat broke both front legs. step and knee, tendon attachment ruptured, causing it to deviate laterally. Highly classified, bled out internally. Might be an eagle, broke back and neck. Park's wave dancer horse collapsed, spinal cord fracture. The night arrival, sustained severe head trauma, bleeding from ears and nose from thrashing in the starting gate. And the lefty, horse appears to have suffered major back injury fracture after leaving starting gate, continued down the stretch until a stop near finish line, showed bilateral hind leg paralysis prior to stopping, euthanized. Yes, this horse tried to continue running after breaking his back. And then there was the Pennsylvania 2016 report, to date the most detailed I have received. It's worth noting that according to the necropsies, virtually every one of the dead horses died with ulcers, most extensive to severe. Great white buffalo, both front fretlocks attached by skin only, leaving the distal cannon bones exposed, covered with ground-in dirt and severe bruising. Stand by your man, 1/3 of left scapula shattered into multiple displaced pieces, severe damage of the surrounding skeletal muscle and soft tissue, including a severed blood vessel and severe hemorrhage. Gold Teak, this horse was involved in a 3-horse collision, broken back, death due to vertebral fracture and exsanguination. In other words, she bled out. Digger's Jigger, this horse was involved in a 3-horse collision, the same as above. Found dead in her stall next morning, death due to axiomusculoskeletal trauma and exsanguination. Again, she bled out. Dancing Terror, left hind limb was swollen with a puncture wound through which bone was protruding, 8 large pieces of bone and numerous small pieces present. Is You Talking to Me, left front fetlock attached by skin only, leaving the distal cannon bones exposed, covered with ground-in dirt and severe bruising. Age of Fluffy, spine fractured. Gastric ulcers are common in horses on NSAIDs and in training. These were extensive and may have caused the horse to be suffering from pain during the paddock period. This may have led to the horse rearing and flipping over backwards. Again, this is all from the racing commissions. Bobby McDuffie, complete rupture of the distal sesamoidal ligaments with hemorrhage. The spleen is enlarged and filled with blood. Gambler 5, deep digital flexor tendon completely severed and displaced. Dorsal surface of the superficial digital flexor tendon shredded. Multiple ligaments torn. Medial proximal sesamoid has a complete mid-body fracture. Lateral proximal sesamoid fractured into multiple pieces. That's 1 horse, 1 death. And finally, Queen Patron, compound fracture of fetlock, protrusion of metacarpal and sesamoid bones through the laceration. Exposed bones are covered in dirt and debris. The mucosa of the stomach contains 53 erosions and ulcers. That number, 2,000, staggering though it is, tells but a part of the story. Each year, countless others, perhaps just as many as those dying on the track, perish from what the industry conveniently dismisses as non-racing causes. Things like colic, a painful abdominal condition, laminitis, excruciating inflammation of the feet, the proverbial complication after surgery, infection, barn accident, or simply found dead in stall. In truth, however, the where and how matters not a whit. In truth, every dead racehorse is a racing with a capital R casualty. And worse, all of them, whether killed on the track or off, were victims prior to dying. Forced to endure, made to suffer the standard racehorse life. That is, a life of heart-rending solitude and isolation, all the more cruel when done to naturally social, herd-oriented animals like horses. A life of miserable, monotonous confinement. And except for race day or perhaps a brief training period in the morning, a life of spirit-crushing immobilization. A pathetic stillness that makes a mockery of the industry claim that horses are born to run, love to run. A life of needles and syringes and injury-numbing chemicals. A life of absolute control and utter subjugation. Of lip tattoos, nose chains, metal mouth bits, and leather whips. A life of anxiety and stress, shuffled from trainer to trainer, barn to barn, track to track, state to state. A life as a thing, a piece of property to be bought, sold, traded, and dumped whenever and however the owner decides. In short, a life of negation. In reality, no life at all. Then to slaughter. While the industry desperately tries to downplay the extent of the problem, cunningly flashing its hollow zero-tolerance policies and dropping the bucket aftercare programs in defense, we do have statistics from which to draw conclusions. According to the Equine Welfare Alliance, using USDA data, in the 9-year period 2008 to 2016, over 1.2 million American horses were sent to slaughter. As an aside, the last equine slaughterhouses on U.S. soil closed in 2007. Now we simply ship them, itself a horror, to Canada and Mexico. That 1.2 million translates to roughly 134,000 every year. A Wild for Life Foundation study, the only of its kind, and again using USDA data, found that from 2002 to 2010, fully 19% of the American slaughtered were thoroughbreds. Even if we were to use a far lower percentage, say 12, we're still left with well over 15,000 thoroughbred racehorses butchered annually. For comparison purposes, the Jockey Club's official registry for new thoroughbreds, or in a telling bit of language, full crop, has numbered roughly 21,000 in each of the past 6 years. In other words, that's 20,000 or so coming in, 15,000 or more going out via slaughter. In other words, slaughter has been and remains this industry's primary method for disposing spent racehorses. And that's just thoroughbreds, mind you. Multiple thousands more erstwhile standardbred and quarter horse athletes meet this same brutal end. And what is this brutal end? Sold at auction to kill buyers, transported to holding pens, and ultimately shipped hundreds, if not thousands of miles in cramped trailers, where the USDA has determined they can go 28 to 36 hours without food, water, or rest. Their final destination is a cold, concrete abattoir. Here, amid the terrifying sights, sounds, and smells of death, they will be shot. Often, this takes multiple rounds as the panicked, flight-inclined equines make difficult targets, a fact exacerbated by floors made slippery with blood. Shackled by their hind legs, hoisted and hung upside down, slashed, bled out, yes, occasionally while still conscious, and finally butchered for their meat. The whimsical names and cheering crowds a bitter lifetime ago. Of this final perfidy, Twyla Francois, Canadian horse slaughter expert, said it best, and I quote, "They are so frightened, you can see them in the auction ring, that they search the ring looking for a friendly face. We see this at the slaughterhouses too, where they're still seeking out affection from even the slaughterhouse workers themselves. And one thing we saw that really broke my heart was you would see the workers walking by the pens, and the horses would rush the pens, looking for comfort from these men who were going to kill them. It just seems like such a betrayal. Nothing can prepare them for the journey they have ahead of them after they've been given up." All this, the snapped, shattered, and shredded body parts of race day, the collapsed and died in morning practice, colic, lemonitis found dead in stall, and the exsanguinations, leads to a single inescapable conclusion. The American horse racing industry is engaged in wholesale carnage. Again, not hyperbole, carnage. Armed with the proceeding, you might think this would be an easy sell to mainstream America. After all, sensibilities are changing. Ringling Brothers is dead. It will soon be illegal to use elephants for any form of entertainment in New York State. SeaWorld, owing mostly to the film Blackfish, has ended its captive breeding program for orcas, and it's but a matter of time before those shows disappear entirely, and with that, perhaps SeaWorld itself. The National Aquarium in Baltimore will release all of its remaining performing dolphins to a seaside sanctuary by 2020, and as mentioned, greyhound racing is not long for this country. As a matter of fact, earlier this month, Floridians voted overwhelmingly to ban the practice effective the end of next year, A monumental victory that will in one fell swoop shutter 11 of the nation's final 17 dog tracks. So what gives with horse racing? Why is it that the HSUS, one of the largest and richest animal advocacy organizations in the world, stands against all animal entertainment, the bullfight, the rodeo, the circus, film, television, commercials, and yes, dog racing, all of it except horse racing? For me, the answer is twofold. One, we are a relatively young organization, and while we have made great strides educating and exposing, much ground remains. The second and far more significant hurdle, however, can be found right there in racing's well-known epithet, the sport of kings. Yes, horse racing is sport, a notion so deeply ingrained in our national consciousness that we hardly give it a second thought. Racing results are published in the sports pages. NBC Sports covers the Triple Crown, Breeders' Cup, and other big races. Horse racing was featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated 46 times in that iconic magazine's first 30 years. ESPN, the sports network, named Secretary the 35th greatest athlete of the 20th century. Excuse me. With Man of War citation and 2 jockeys also cracking the top 100. And then there are the movies. Using irresistible sentimentality, Hollywood has, practically from its beginning, unabashedly cranked out celluloid sports classics featuring racehorses. National Velvet, The Black Stallion, Seabiscuit, the kids' movie Racing Stripes, Ruffian, Disney's Secretariat, to name a few. Indeed, we need look no further than our own area, where hallowed Saratoga Racecourse proudly bills itself the oldest sporting venue in the nation, dating all the way back to the Civil War. If racing is bad, most people think it's bad like boxing or baseball during the steroid era. Dirty, perhaps a bit corrupt, but nothing a good house cleaning couldn't fix. In the end, it's really but a matter of simple conditioning. If you say something long and often enough, people begin to accept it as fact. They have been telling us that horse racing is a sport for centuries. Well, to that, I replied, if horse racing is a sport, then that word must be redefined, for the competitive racing of horses resembles no other accepted sport on the planet. And what other sport are the bodies of adolescent athletes pounded into the ground without remorse? And what other sport are the athletes locked in tiny spaces alone for over 23 hours a day? And what other sport are the athletes drugged and doped without consent? And what other sport are the athletes whipped, beaten for motivation? And what other sport are the athletes condemned to a life as literal chattel? And what other sport are the athletes routinely, every day, dying on the playing field and after having the rest of the evening's festivities continue? And in what other sport are most of the athletes brutally and violently slaughtered once their careers have come to an end? Horse racing is sport. If not for the gravity involved, it would be absurd. No, horse racing is but exploitation of a weaker species for among the most shameful of reasons, $2 bets. To those who sustain this sordid business, we say, slake those gambling urges with decidedly inanimate slots and scratch-offs. Leave the horses out of it. To those who trade in equines in the pursuit of cash and fleeting glory, we say, find a commodity that doesn't bleed. Take up a hobby that can't cry out in pain. Enough. Enough. Thank you.
We're going to do some questions, guys, and then stick around, hang out. We just got a bunch of vegan wings, too, if you haven't had any. They're awesome. They're from Burger and Wolves. So we're going to set those up right now, too. There's still food for anybody to kind of trickle in later. And then we'll do Q&A with Pat, and yeah, stick around.
Questions?
Where's PETA stand on horse racing?
Unfortunately, not strong enough. They present a muddled message. They've done some exposés on racing, but then they'll commend Del Mar out in San Diego for improvements that they made to the track, or so-called reforms. For me, this is a no-brainer. This is a very simple, line in the sand here. Take a firm stand, especially a group like PETA, who has as its mission statement, no animal should be used for, food, clothing, testing, and entertainment. Again, given what we've seen with in recent years with other forms of animal entertainment, it seems to me that PETA should be fully on board with ending this industry once and for all, rather than these half measures. As a matter of fact, they're behind an initiative whereby bettors at NYRA tracks in New York State can donate a portion of their winnings to thoroughbred aftercare. Not that that's not a good idea in theory, helping individual horses, land in a safe place after their so-called careers are over. But again, it sends the wrong message, as far as I'm concerned. It shows the public that there's room for improvement here, and if we just reform a few things here and there, it's okay. It's not okay. Again, this is about gambling, and there's no place for it in the 21st century society. John?
Can you talk about the VLT revenues and how that's changed
Sure.
the ability for people to survive?
Sure, that's a great question. VLTs are video lottery terminals or slot machines. And most of horse racing today, almost all of harness racing, I don't know if you're familiar with harness racing, that's where there's a buggy and a driver, is being fully subsidized by these slot machines. We have 11 tracks in New York State, 7 harness and 4 thoroughbred. 9 of the 11 have what's called a racino attached to the track. So if you go up to Saratoga harness track, for instance, there is the harness track itself, and then there's a racino where you can go in and have dinner and play slot machines. Most people are unaware that a portion of the revenue that those slot machines generate gets diverted to the racing industry through increased purses, through breeding incentives. So it's not an exaggeration to say if not for these slot machines, harness racing would have disappeared in New York State. And that's a common story throughout the country. Finger Lakes has a racino, that's another thoroughbred track. Aqueduct has a racino. Aqueduct is one of the 3 NYRA tracks, also with Belmont and Saratoga. And although Saratoga and Belmont don't have racinos attached to them, they are benefiting from the Aqueduct racino. So our message is, it's not enough to refrain from betting on these races and refrain from watching, but you should not go to these racinos. If you're going to gamble at a standalone casino like Rivers and Schenectady, or some of the Native American casinos throughout the state. Don't go to one that's attached to a horse track. Yes?
Circle back on the gambling aspect. It's been almost a decade since I last looked at it, but it was my understanding that in New York State, gambling is illegal with the exception of Native American reservations, which are on their own totalitarian, but their own laws. And then the exemption for, as you mentioned, racinos, which actually carve out gambling is legal only in the instances where it's permitted adjacent to a racetrack.
That's correct.
So, if to remove horse racing inherent, would it not be imperative then, or a roundabout way, to actually consider potentially altering the New York State Constitution to permit gambling throughout the state?
As a matter of fact, it has been opened. There are 4 new casinos that have opened up in the last 2 years that are standalone casinos. Again, Rivers and Schenectady is the closest that we have, and they are independent of horse racing. I think they've allotted for possibly 2 or 3 more throughout the state, so it's already going in that direction. In addition, the Supreme Court ruled this past year on sports betting, making it possible now for each state to allow betting on all sports legally. Right now it's just, I believe, Nevada that you can legally bet on a football game. So that will change the market clearly. The problem that horse racing faces is they have been fighting a losing battle for decades now. Since the lotteries came into being, and casinos started, popping up throughout the states, and Native Americans were the first. They have been struggling to win the younger generations, especially, into their business. So the demographics are very, very bad long term for horse racing. The typical bettor is a 60-year-old guy with a Rumple daily racing form in his hand. So you're not seeing a lot of 21, 22-year-olds, trying to figure out how to handicap a horse race. That's not to say it doesn't happen, but not in enough numbers to support the industry long term. So that's why they turn to state legislatures for subsidies. It's corporate welfare is what they're getting. And because they are so powerful, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, they have been able to, win this argument, for the longest time. Now that we're on the landscape, and there are other groups that are, talking about this issue, they're getting some pushback, and I think that some legislators are starting to become more educated on this issue too. So, in other words, if you take those video lottery terminals, for instance, if 5 or 10% of that money is going to horse racing to prop up that business, that 5 or 10% could be going to education in the state or other general public good issues. So it's an issue that needs to be taken on, and we're trying to become more involved in it ourselves. But again, it's complicated because each state has their own laws. But again, that's a big part of the story, is that horse racing is being propped up by these slot machines. Yes?
What do you say to people who suggest that horse racers are treated better than most people are?
Well, it's absurd. And of course, that's a common argument that we hear, especially up in Saratoga when we're protesting. From doing this over the last 5 years or so, I have been fortunate to meet quite a few people across the country that have been involved in horse racing, and they tell me what the conditions are. Again, I don't have a racing background, so I wasn't on the backside, so I can't speak to it, as an eyewitness. But I've heard enough from people that were involved, and there is no denying that horses are kept in their stalls for over 23 hours a day. We don't hear another side of that argument, from the racing people. That alone is cruel. Again, if we're going to, how do we define that they're being treated better than us? I mean, the fact that they get food, water, and shelter, is that a life? Not to me, it's not. And I think that languishing in tiny stalls all alone is probably the worst of it. It's terrible that the killing is, I read those names. That's terrible, but that life is over. The suffering that goes on, before, during, that's horrible. And of course, the slaughter at the end. So it's a crazy argument. They have nothing they're grasping, and that's the wonderful thing about what I do here is these are facts. They're irrefutable facts. I report the deaths as they happen. So they don't have a counter to that. They can't come at me and say, yeah, but, so they have to grasp, and that's part of their grasping is that, these horses are pampered, and it's just not true.
Yeah, the owners and trainers, who do you find more responsible?
The owner, because it's his property, is ultimately responsible, but usually the trainer is the person that's hands-on, day to day.
Do you think that the owner knows what's going on?
In some
all the time
cases, yes. In most cases, probably not.
Yeah.
I've heard from people that were owners for a brief period of time, and once they found out what actually happens behind the scenes, the drugging and the doping, and they got out of the business. It seems, again, when you're conditioned like we have been, and you see NBC Sports, making a big deal, the Run for the Roses, the most exciting 2 minutes in sports, the Kentucky Derby. There's just this fanfare that is built around this, the sport of kings. And so, you can actually invest in a racehorse for a relatively small amount as part of a larger group of people. So it seems very appealing. But your short answer is the trainers are the ones that are there day in and day out. So they're the people that are most responsible, I would say. And I just wanted, to follow up on your PETA question. This needs to be said. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the HSUS's stance on horse racing. I did mention them in the talk. They have betrayed horses to such a degree that it practically leaves me speechless. Not only do they state, not only are they not against horse racing, they are actively promoting horse racing. The HSUS has stated unequivocally that we are not philosophically against horse racing. It's a sport. It needs to be cleaned up, but we're not philosophically against it. There's only one explanation as far as I'm concerned. The organization is compromised, whether it's at the board level or major donors or a combination thereof. It's compromised. So I would encourage all of you, again, they have done some good things for animals, puppy mill investigations, other things, but I would think twice about supporting an organization like that. Again, for me, this is black and white. What place is there for this in 21st century society? No. PETA is only a little less compromised because they send out mixed messages, but the HSUS is, I think they should be blacklisted by anyone that really cares about animal rights. Yes.
I just think it would be helpful too. I know I grew up going to the track, and so I met people like you guys and started learning, and I stopped. Just your own. Is this something that has always been a passion of yours? As an adult, did you go to the track when you were younger?
I did. I went maybe 2 or 3 times, and I remember I was a big sports fan in the 70s, so I had a favorite in every sport. I didn't follow racing year round, but I definitely tuned in Triple Crown time, Seattle Slew and Affirm. That was my era, and I watched. It was exciting. Of course, that's all television. The way they build it up to be exciting. This is a tough issue for animal rights activists. I think it's flown under the radar for a long time. I understand the passion behind, obviously, factory farming, animal testing, but this needs to be addressed. And again, things are trending one way in America. It will die. There's no question about it. Horse racing will go, but we have to accelerate it. So to answer your question, I was as blind as anyone. Getting into it though, like I said in the talk, I was writing the animal rights blog and I was just trying to cover all different issues. And I just started doing some research and to write about horse racing. I hadn't covered it yet. Like, there's nobody out there doing this. There's nobody taking this industry on, except for slaughter. And that's why I kind of fell into it. So I don't have any horse background. I've never had a horse, but there's a need out there, and that's why we're here. Yes.
Pat, is there any data available since horse racing wrong's inception of bets? Have they gone down at all?
Good. It's a very good question. All metrics are down since not since horse racing wrongs, but over the last 15 or 20 years. The number of race days across the country. This is nationally. So you gotta kind of block out the Saratoga propaganda that you get each year, locally. So they're out there saying that our attendance is up the last couple of years, and that may be so. Saratoga is an anomaly. It is one of the 2 or 3, if not the most elite track in the country. So you can't consider that when you're looking at racing in general. But the national numbers, race days, number of races, the field sizes, that's the number of horses in each race, the foal crop that I talked about, the number of thoroughbreds that are registered each year to race has been in a steady, precipitous decline for years now. It's contracted. I also have a great page on my site. It's shuttered racetracks since the year 2000. We are at a net loss of 34 tracks across America, a net loss. They're not opening new ones, okay? So that's good. So again, it's trending one way. But it falls on us to get the word out there, to spread this information and to, and again, go after the legislators that are voting to prop this industry up. Again, the big problem with that is when they hear about lost jobs, or potentially lost jobs, or economic havoc, locally, legislators, are gonna vote one way. They don't wanna be on the wrong side of that issue, so they need to hear from us, the animal people. They need to know this is not acceptable anymore. And again, we have all this wind at our back, with Ringwood and SeaWorld and Greyhound Racing. That Florida vote was huge. They have been fighting that, down in Florida, the Grade 2K people and others, for years. And for that to finally happen, and it wasn't close. The vote was overwhelming. It may be, a 50-50 state politically, but not when it came to the Greyhounds. And, and another struggle that we have, from horse racing as opposed to Greyhound, everyone can relate to dogs, or most people can. And when these adoption agencies started springing up around the turn of the century, the Greyhound groups, people saw it firsthand, how these poor dogs coming off the track. Much more difficult to have that close contact with horses. So it's another hurdle that we have. It's just we have a proximity to dogs that we don't have with horses. So, but again, there's no difference. And so for the HSUS to say, you can go to their site, you read everything that they say about Greyhound racing on their site applies to horse racing, everything. And yet they're out there saying we're not against horse racing and trying to help it, trying to help the industry reform itself. It's terrible. It's horrible. Yes.
Are there particular milestones that the Greyhound racing took that the horse racing?
Milestone? There were, yes. Grade 2K is a great site for that. They've been fighting this, I think, since around the year 2000. They have, they mark the victories state by state. I think 40 states, well, not 41 with Florida, have banned it outright. There's another 4 states that haven't taken that step to ban, but there is no Greyhound racing, and I think one of them is Connecticut. Obviously, a dog track's not going to open in Connecticut. So right now, there's 5 states that currently hold, Greyhound races. 6 tracks total in those 5 states. So yeah, there were milestones along the way. I think Massachusetts was the most recent state prior to Florida. So yeah, it's going to go the same way with us, but again, it's going to take a national campaign, and that's what we are trying to do. Nicole and I work on trying to get, this out there nationally. Nicole can speak to, the protests that we have actually sponsored and supported. I think, what's it, 6 states now, 6 or 7 states?
Yeah, I think 8.
8. We've sent materials across the country. We've been in different veg fests in Colorado and Vegas. So, again, we're young. 5 years is really nothing. But and it can be frustrating. You get this stuff. I do this every day, and then at the end of the year, when I start putting those FOIA requests in, it can be very discouraging. You're seeing the same stuff, and these words, they don't lie. I mean, it's right there. But you have to just keep pressing forward and know that change will come. Yes.
I always get nervous about being accurate with my activism.
Sure.
And I found a lot of conflicting information about foaling mares and quarter horse foaling mares and slaughter the babies and thoroughbreds nurse off them. But then I found other animal rights sites that said that's not really accurate. So I wanted just to.
Yeah, and that's why I really don't address it, because if I can't, find hard facts, I don't put it on the site. It happens, these brood mares, they tear the foals away from the moms, and a lot of those foals, never even get into the pipeline. I mean, they just, they're killed, before they even get into racing. So yeah, it's there, but it's more anecdotal than, so I don't have statistics. And again, I don't want to put it out there unless I can stand behind it. And that's why we have such confidence when we go up to Saratoga to protest, because we have the numbers. And then when you get a guy walking by and saying, you guys don't know what you're talking about, and then you go up to them and you say, we do actually, and here's a flyer with all the information. And I'm not infallible, but to this point, my lists have been infallible. There has not been one horse since 2014 that I have had to remove from my killed in action list because somebody from the industry says that he or she is alive. So again, there's no argument. And even if you did have to remove one, we're talking about over 5,000 that I have right now. So what is the other side to the argument?
That's an important question you're asking, because it makes it hard to the ability to always look in somebody's eye when they start defending horse racing and say thousands are being killed before the age of 6, probably, right?
Right.
And when they argue, you send them to the site and the list is there, the name, the race, the racetrack, the date. There's nothing, so if you stick to the death piece, you can be pretty sure that you're not gonna have any, ability for somebody to refute it. Another thing I just wanted to mention, the other argument on the side of owners owning racehorses until they're 6 or so, is racehorses or any horse can easily live to be 32 years old. It costs I work with some rescues, it costs an average of, it can easily cost $600 a month to take care of the hay, the grain, the farrier visits, the veterinary care. So if a horse is retired from a syndicate or from an owner at 6 years old and lives to be 32, there's enough years, that's $200,000 price tag. So who wants to take that burden versus slaughtering the horse?
Right.
Who says I'll take a horse that chances are is high strung, possibly lame in some way, has never been treated right, and take something on that's gonna cost them $200,000 to put in their pasture. So it's a huge argument against why these slaughter numbers are dead nuts on. And his slaughter numbers of 15,000 compared to 20,000 as a full crop, that's 3/4 of these babies we're killing every year. And so we read about all the excitement about New York State breeders. Oh, we're breeding them to just send them down or up the Northway. The Adirondack Northway is our own artery to slaughter for Canadian slaughterhouses. It's sad that it is.
Yes.
And I'm just curious of the money in horse racing, because that's a big problem. Gonna be hard to break. The owner versus the trainer versus the men in that stable and all, what are the percentages? Do you have any idea?
As far as what they make,
Yeah, where's the big
I
money?
don't. I mean, obviously, when you're talking about what are called stakes races, that's the highest level. A stakes race, the owner's actually got to ante up to get into the race, so they have to contribute to the purse in addition to other sources for the purse. So the Kentucky Derby, for instance, or the Travers locally, those are stakes races. Those people are making money, probably. But then again, not all. I mean, some of them are, just wealthy people that are into it as a hobby. Let's buy a racehorse, take a chance, that kind of thing. Most people, again, I defer to the experts, people that I have met through this. The bulk of horse racing is, these claiming tracks, what I call claiming tracks, like Finger Lakes and Aqueduct, for example. A claiming race is a race in which all horses are for sale prior to the race. That's the lowest, the bottom of the barrel racing. So most of horse racing is comprised of these claiming races. The people at that level are just eking out livings. They're just, even the trainers, they're not making a ton of money. So when we talk about the money that's involved, it's the Triple Crown, Breeders' Cup, Saratoga, that's the big money.
Can you expand on claiming races a little bit to explain how the horses change ownership?
Right. And so I mentioned in the talk how these are constantly being shuffled. Obviously like an American Pharoah or California Chrome, these are the superstars. They're going to stay with one owner, one trainer, for as long as they're racing. But again, most horses in America are claimers, and they're constantly being dropped in these claiming races. And again, the way it works is, if it's a $5,000 claiming race, it means that all horses in that race are for sale for $5,000 prior to the race. So any licensed owner or trainer can drop a claim on that horse. And at the end of the race, ownership changes hands. So we often hear, from the other side, they're like family. Well, anyone that is involved in racing long enough will eventually enter one of their horses in a claiming race. So would you do that to one of your children? Would you put your child up for sale and not know whose hands they're going to fall into? It's absurd, of course. So the those claiming races are, it's bottom of the barrel, the lowest tier. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I had my eyes opened a few years ago, daughter
Yeah.
here.
She's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, and I just, I didn't realize the BLTs at Racino's help support, so I'll be making some
Excellent.
changes in that department too. But I was really moved by what you said about the sport and kind of cutting that down. And I was looking on your website for like where that was, because I found that to be a new, something that caught me.
Right.
That I hadn't heard before, and I thought it was a really powerful argument.
Yes. Well, thank you. It is on the top of the page, on the
Is
whole
it?
page.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Again, it's a huge hurdle. You got to break through that thinking. As long as we continue to call it a sport, the implication is that it can be reformed, just like baseball when the steroids were so prevalent. It's not the case, and it's not a sport. It's a gambling business, pure and simple. It's just great branding. They've been very adept at marketing their product for centuries, literally. Again, Saratoga Racecourse, I think, opened in 1863. They call themselves the oldest sporting venue in the nation. And, so you have to get beyond that. So when I should mention that locally we have made great strides, and again, with a lot of help from people here, protesting up in Saratoga for the past 3 or 4 summers. We're averaging 75, 80 protesters a week, and in Travers the last 2 years, about 100 protesters. And with that brings the media. So now they're starting to pay attention, where for years it was ignored because Saratoga was considered untouchable, too important to the local economy. And now they're coming up to cover us. And again, part of that has to do with what's happening across the country. Ringling Brothers was huge. And so now people are starting to look at it maybe a little differently. But again, still it's covered under, in sports locally. So Times Union, the Gazette, the local stations, it's all, in sports. But they're at least starting to cover the deaths also. So progress.
Back to the slaughter a little bit. Has either government, Mexico or Canada, is there anything in your pipeline as far as getting rid of it?
I don't believe so. I haven't heard anything. There are animal
Is it a
activists.
major industry in their country?
Here's the problem with slaughter. It's horrible what happens to horses at the slaughterhouses. But ultimately, it's about demand. And as long as the Europeans and the Asians want horse meat, there's going to be industry to supply it, whether it's in Canada or Mexico or some other country. So it's simple economics. So yeah, it's complicated in that regard. We have to convince the Italians and the French and the Japanese to stop ordering, stop using it. So
Is that where it's mainly sold? Is it eaten in Canada and Mexico?
I don't believe so. I don't think there's a market for it. I could be wrong, but I know that the primary buyers are European countries. I know that France and Italy, off the top of my head. Japan certainly is a big consumer. So that's, you have to attack it from that end also. For me, it's about racehorses going to slaughter. But even if we were to eliminate all racehorses from going to slaughter, there would still be horses going to slaughter because there's a market for it. If they had to start breeding them from, just to be food animals like we do with, cows and pigs, that's what they would do. But now they don't have to do that because they have ready markets. All these cast-offs.
When did the United States end horse slaughter?
What was that?
When did the United States end horse slaughter?
We haven't officially ended it, so it's still possible that slaughterhouses
Oh, it
will
could be
reopen.
happening
The
still.
last ones to be active were in 2007. I think there were 3, 2 in Illinois, 1 in Texas, or the other way around. It's just been defunded, so there's no funding for inspectors. Go in there and inspect like they do with USDA. So that could change. If you get the wrong people, at the top of the government or in Congress, and there's enough of a push for it. And so there are people that will argue, well, rather than get slaughtered here, if they're going to be slaughtered, let's at least save them the transport stress of being cramped in those trailers and open up something close by. You know, that's not acceptable.
But those governments aren't even, you don't know if they're even concerned with.
They have inspectors. I know Canada is better than Mexico. I don't think that's much of a surprise when it comes to the inspection. But you know, that Twyla Francois who I quoted, she's part of a group that has undercover videos. So if you ever want to, go on, just Google, these undercover videos at Canadian slaughterhouses, and you'll see these guys. They shoot them with a .22 caliber rifle. Again, because these horses are, slipping and sliding and panicking and terrified, it's not a clean shot. So often they have to shoot multiple times. There's a video of this guy taking his sweet old time, reloading his rifle, while the horse is, fleeing about. It's horrible. Horrible.
They don't use stun guns like they do in
They don't.
farm animals?
They don't. My understanding is that they're not bred for that, where cattle is docile, and they're not going to, they don't have that flight instinct that horses do.
Okay.
So I don't think they can get, close enough to use it. So that's why they use these rifles. But again, not an exaggeration to say that some of them are still conscious
Right.
when they're being bled out.
They sometimes, in general, slaughterhouses like them to be conscious because their heart's still beating to push the blood out.
It's true. Slaughterhouses are horrific places. We were writing about that years ago. There's virtually 100% turnover from year to year in the slaughterhouse. They use a lot of work release prisoners, a lot of illegal immigrants. It's horrible work.
Yeah.
Who would want to work in a slaughterhouse? So obviously you're not getting, the best conditions. Often the inspectors are in a different room. They're not even watching the slaughter. They're waiting for the butchering end, to inspect the meat. More concerned about the health of the public. So there's all kinds of atrocities that are happening in the United States within, general slaughterhouses.
Right.
Yes.
Do you want to address the penal zone thing at all, or is that even relevant?
It is. Virtually it's called Butte. It's been likened to aspirin for humans. Virtually every horse that ends up in the slaughter pipeline, every horse, whether they're a racehorse or just a general, riding horse or rodeo horse, has Butte in his system when he sends to slaughter, and it's one of those drugs that takes, quite a while to leave the system. It has been shown to be a carcinogen. So, there are people that will argue, don't eat horse meat because you could get cancer. I don't, it's an issue. It's part of the conversation. Horses have Butte in their systems. But frankly, that's not my concern whether a Frenchman, is eating Butte-laced horse meat. But yes, it is an issue.
And it's given to the horses for pain?
Yeah, it's been likened to like Tylenol, so it's for an anti-inflammatory, that kind of a drug. It's just very common, but I guess it stays in the system for quite a while, and it's a carcinogen.
The point is, though, we shouldn't be slaughtering horses purely on that basis, that we're giving them horses that, in other words, this country has major issues with this because we even allow our horses that are tainted to go to slaughter knowing they're going to be meat for somebody else. Where's the morality
True.
of that?
No, that's
right?
good. That's a
So
good
meaning this is another
Right.
stage of immorality with horses and racing.
Right.
It just shows you the blatant disregard.
And the racing, yeah, exactly. The racing people know that there's Butte in the system, and they don't care. So again, it's a morally bankrupt industry from top to bottom.
Is there a testing system as far as like with, say, MLB players on steroids that the horses have to go through before they race, after
Well,
they
it's-
race, during their career? Or?
Each state has their own laws, and there's been a big push. HSUS is behind this push to try to get a national governing body to kind of take over horse racing and to make all the rules uniform and all the penalties uniform. So that's an issue clearly. Some tracks will test maybe the winner and one of the other horses at random, you know, so not every horse is being tested, you know, either prior or after a race. It's haphazard, basically. And for, you know, we know why.
Is it a known factor
There's
that
just
a
so
lot
much-
of these are pumped with?
Yeah, there's over, you know, 100 different kinds of drugs,
Right.
you know, in a typical, you know, race, well, not at any one time, but there's 100 different types of drugs that are used regularly, you know, within racing.
And they've probably gotten to the point where they can mask it anyway now, right?
They, you know, sometimes they can, you know, sometimes they get caught. I mean, you know, there's a distinction between drugging and doping. Drugging are legal medications that they can use, but maybe they're using them too close to race day or that. Doping are illegal substances, and I remember writing about, you know, several years ago, some quarter horse tracks where these horses were being doped with dimorphin, which is 40 times more powerful than morphine. These horses were being, you know, juiced. I mean, they call it frog juice, actually. That's because originally it came from the backs of frogs, South American frogs, but now, of course, they make it synthetically. Can you imagine 40 times more powerful? And it's just to make the horse just, you know, all high energy, frantic, and, you know, again, they don't care. Yes? That's all right.
In horse racing itself, it does seem like statistics have gone up in the last several years. And is that because they're breeding them to be so strong and fast, but fitter legs, or why is that
No,
happening?
what do you mean by it's
Like breaking down.
Breaking down?
But it seems
We
like.
don't know. See, that's the thing. You know, so some of the purists, the people that are trying to reform racing, and talk about, you know, no drugs on race day, blah blah blah. They'll say, well, back in the 50s and 60s. No one knows. It could be the case, but probably isn't. In my mind, I think it's an inherent part of horse racing. Is that if you force a horse to run at a breakneck speed in an unnatural way, you know, going around in an oval, you know, bad things are going to happen. And so, yeah, they do breed them for speed, you know, so they have thinner legs carrying 1,000 pounds of weight. So I can't answer that question. All I can tell you is, since I've been doing this since 2014, the numbers are pretty much static. They're still pretty much the same.
That's surprising when you
Yeah.
said that. That seems about the time I started paying attention.
Yeah.
It seemed like it went up, so maybe it is just information getting out.
Exactly.
We never
No
knew.
one's ever done this before. I mean,
Right.
this is all new. No one ever, and again, it's not to, you know, toot my own horn. It's nothing to do with me. I'm just saying that this has never been done before. No one's ever had these lists. So we don't know. I mean, but if you know, if I had to guess, it's always it's just hidden, you know.
So you believe that the whole career of Saratoga's been horses dying every year?
Absolutely. And
15,
there's
20
another thing
every
about
year.
Saratoga. 2 years ago, well, 2017, they lost 21 horses, and it was really big news locally. They were, you know, I was interviewed maybe a dozen times that summer by all 3 stations, the newspapers. So that was great. But then I was concerned that if there was a dip the following year, people would, you know, forget it again.
Right.
And so every time I was interviewed, I would say, look, the Gaming Commission in New York State has made this information public since 2009. So to New York's credit, at least, we have had information going back to 2009. Saratoga has averaged 14 kills a summer since 2009. So 21, yeah, was an all-time high, but it really isn't out of whack with what their average was. And so, you know, this past year, I think we're up to 11 or 12, because a couple died after the meet ended while they were in training, closer to the average. Yes, it happens every year. It
And the
just
season
wasn't covered.
expanded in between that time frame too, so.
Yes.
It probably is consistent. It's
Right.
just more races.
Exactly, exactly. Yes.
So obviously it's in the best interests of the owners and the representatives of the track to keep the spectacle of a breakdown at a minimum. Do you know anything about the regulations or the protocol as to who calls the shots for on-track euthanasia? Is
Right.
there any oversight
So-
that have the final call? What is that?
Right, so when a horse breaks down, it's called a breakdown, can't walk off the track by himself, The regulatory vet, whether it's a track vet or a state commission vet, will go to the scene and he will make an assessment. You know, if that horse can be vanned off, loaded onto a van, horse ambulance, and taken back to the barn, that's the optimal solution. If the horse can't be moved, that's when they bring the tarp out and they'll euthanize right there on the track. And so yeah, it's the vet makes the call usually. I mean, of course, if the trainer is on site or the owner, you know, you could have some say, but usually they do what is in the best interest of the horse if the horse is so badly injured that he can't be moved or not, you know. But ideally is to get him out of sight. Yes.
I had a question, yeah,
Sure.
I just want to say thank you, I think you do amazing work.
Thank you.
And I know it takes a lot of effort, it's a lot of dedication, and you open up all of our eyes, and, you know, we spread that to people that we meet, and huge thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And that's the only way we're going to stop this is by getting the word out. So, you know, people say, what can we do? What can we do? Just, you know, again, horse racing wrongs, that's where all the information is. Just, you know, refer people to the site, write letters to the editor if you can. People need to, you know, the public, the masses that aren't aware need to know we're here and we're not going anywhere. And that's why these protests are so crucial. So I would encourage everyone here to, you know, next summer try to make 1 or 2 of our protests. It's so important to have the numbers. If you have 5 people out there, they're going to dismiss you. You're just a bunch of animal rights crazies. You have 100, they can't do it so easily. And I'd like to have 200, 300 people on the corner of Union and East. You know, imagine the impact that would have. And so people will start to see that, you know, this is going the wrong way here for the racing people. And it is. It's just not fast enough for us.
Thank you.
Yes.
If you could sit some of these parents down that bring their children to these events, what would you say to them?
Education, you know, again, you don't want to judge, I mean, because we were all there, and none of us were born perfect.
But knowing what we know now.
Yeah, you would just want to educate them and say, look, at this, you know, you give them this list, and you say, you know, read this list yourself, and then tell me how you can bring your child to a race.
Right.
That's it. You got to leave it up to them. You can't tell them that they're bad people or they're unethical. You know, I always say we're just planting seeds. But again, it's just trying to get this information out. That's the key.
Are there any more questions? Okay, perfect. So thank you guys all.